Welcome to The Criminologist, the podcast dedicated to educating and entertaining our listeners. We bring you subject matter experts from around the world and share the latest and greatest evidence-based practices and interventions to help individuals desist from a life of crime and delinquency. Now, please welcome the host of The Criminologist, Joseph Arvidsson.
Hello, and welcome to episode 200 of the Criminologist Podcast. Happy to have you all with us today. And yes, you heard me right, dear listeners. This week, we're not just embarking on another journey into the depths of criminal justice. We are celebrating a significant milestone, our 200th episode of the Criminologist Podcast. Now, this episode is not just a number. It is a testament to the journey we've shared, the knowledge we've gained, and the conversations that have sparked change. As we reflect on our journey, it is astounding to see how dynamic the Criminologist has been. We started with a novel approach, modeling core correctional skills through a mock caseload of fictitious clients. This unique format allowed us to explore the intricacies of correctional practice in a way that has been both engaging and educational. But, as with all journeys, evolution is the key. Our podcast gradually transformed into a more traditional interview format, bringing subject matter experts to the forefront. This shift enabled us to dive deeper into the minds and experiences of those shaping the field of criminal justice. Now, as we celebrate this 200th episode, we are excited to announce some format changes that promise to make the Criminologist Podcast even more engaging. First, we are bringing back some of our great guests, but with a twist. We'll be pairing them with other experts to create a debate-style format, bringing diverse perspectives and dynamic discussions to our listeners. And in response to feedback from our early listeners, we're also considering the return of our fictitious clients. This will allow us to model the core correctional skills practiced globally and highlight elements of our trauma-informed desistance model, also known as TIDES. Hey, speaking of TIDES, we are thrilled to announce the upcoming launch of our TIDES website. If you're intrigued and want to learn more about TIDES, please contact us at our new email, thetidesllc@gmail.com. That's thetidesllc@gmail.com. Finally, as TIDES becomes a reality, we are contemplating a shift in our release schedule to 2 episodes per month. This change will ensure that each episode continues to deliver the high-quality, insightful content you've come to expect from the Criminologist. So, to each and every one of you listening, thank you. Thank you for being part of this journey. Your engagement, feedback, and support have been the driving force behind every episode. Here's to 200 episodes, and to many more as we continue to explore the ever-evolving landscape of criminal justice together. Now, let's dive into this milestone episode with this week's esteemed guest, Dr. Dena Hanley. For over 2 decades, Dr. Hanley has dedicated herself to the noble pursuit of revolutionizing the correctional system. Her journey began with a solid foundation in justice administration from the University of Louisville, followed by a deep dive into the world of criminal justice with a master's as well as a doctorate degree from the University of Cincinnati. This extensive academic background laid the groundwork for what would become a storied career in reshaping correctional administrations. Dr. Hanley is not just a criminal justice expert. She is a visionary restructuralist. Her unique approach focuses on what she believes to be the heartbeat of any organization, its staff. By placing an unwavering emphasis on examining, improving, and enhancing the organizational culture, Dr. Hanley has redefined what it means to implement effective supervision practices. In today's episode, we will explore Dr. Hanley's profound insights and experiences. We'll delve into how her focus on staff as the most valuable asset has transformed Correctional Services over her illustrious 20-year career. Dr. Hanley will share her strategies for fostering a positive and productive organizational culture within correctional administrations, as well as recount the successes and challenges she's encountered along the way. Now, please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Dena Hanley, and I will see you all on the other side. Well, welcome to the show, Dena. So nice to see you again. I know we've talked a couple of times offline. Great to finally get you on the podcast. Why don't we start out by you introducing yourself to the listeners, maybe just sharing with them your pathway into the field. We know there's such a variety of ways that folks find themselves in the field of corrections, community corrections, probation, parole, or even human services. What did that journey look like for you?
Oh, wow. What a great question. First of all, Joe, thank you so much for having me. This podcast has been such a gift. To have a place where we all can come together and share our legacy, because that's really what this is all about, is leaving our legacy on the field that we all love so much. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to contribute here. Oh, my path into criminal justice. Well, I graduated from high school and went into college as a mass communications major. I wanted to be a radio DJ. And then twisted. You too, huh? I actually had my own radio DJ show, and I knew that was not for me. And I jumped around a little bit with my majors. And then I remember sitting, and if you don't mind, I'd like to give some shout outs to some people who made some really, really remarkable marks on my career, and I just wouldn't be here without them. I'm sitting in Dr. Rick Tewksbury's Intro to Corrections class at 8 a.m., and I live in the country, so it's an hour and a half drive to campus, so I'm not half awake. And I hear him talking about the word felony. And that was it. It was like a ton of bricks. This is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. This is it. This is it. Conversely, at the same time, my mother owned a nail salon. And the chair of the Justice Administration Department, Dr. Deborah Wilson, came in at the same time, coincidentally, and I met her 2 or 3 days later. So it was absolutely, this is where I needed to be. And, of course, there were some personal connections with the criminal justice system, family members and things like that. So when I found it, that was it. I have been in criminal justice now for so many years. And I don't want to date myself, but a very, very long time. And I have not questioned it at a stoplight. My career is a little bit eclectic. I started out actually at the University of Cincinnati, and my graduate assistantship was being the researcher on site to Talbot House. Sure. And my phenomenal, wonderful, legendary, all-knowing mentor, Dr. Ed Latessa, made sure that I was where I needed to be. I had thought that I wanted to go into higher ed administration, but he said no, which is really where my heart is, and it's in the organizational capacity of corrections, and that's where I ended up here now. And I've really spent a lot of time in the field, and that's kind of where my heart is. but half of my career is also in academia. So I've been fortunate enough to be able to see both sides of it. But my focus has been on creating environments where our staff can thrive. The staff that we have are amazing. This is the most amazing field. A lot of people are coming in, from different sectors, medicine and business and nonprofits. And I always hear that they are so amazed by the people, how welcoming people are at APPA and ICPA and things like that. And it's just so wonderful to be with people. And when we go to conferences, we get all of this energy and we get all of this excitement. And we come back to these environments that we have to be in every day, and we lose it. And we lose it because the day-to-day is so overwhelming. But I think we're heroes. Every one of us in corrections is a hero because we fight the good fight. When why should we? If you think about it, we only see the failures. They only come back. So we are constantly reinforced with failure. But if the administrations of our community corrections agencies could show our staff, wait a minute, yes, we know we get the failures, but you're still doing the good work. You're doing good work, and let me show you where that work's contributing to the success of this organization. Let me show you where that work is contributing to the success of our field in evidence-based practice. We've done an amazing job with the contextual knowledge of evidence-based practice. People know the words, but we also have a lot of research and a lot of experience that say our staff fill out risk assessments, put them in the file, and that's it. But we can do more. But we have to empower our staff to come up with the more we do, if that makes sense. I mean, we really have to show our staff that we believe in them because those are the experts. Our officers, our probation and parole officers, our case managers, these are the experts, and these are the gatekeepers of our success. They are responsible for whether our organizations fail or succeed. And then we have the probation assistants and the ones that are responsible for moving everything around. And they are responsible for the functionality of our courthouses and our probation departments. Because without them, nothing moves. And they know the answers. They know the problems. They know the answers. And if we could listen to them, we would get so much information and so much expert knowledge to fix the issues that they see. And that is how we support our staff.
Let's stick on this theme of staff, which I couldn't agree more. But can you talk in your experience, Dena? Have you seen the impact of when agencies focus on staff as those MVPs of transforming correctional services? What does it look like when that investment's been made? What do those dividends look like?
I would like to say I have seen it. I have seen attempts, a lot of attempts. Often our administrators, because, look, they're under a lot of pressure too. They're the ones that keep us legitimate. They're the ones that keep us funded. They're the ones that keep us on the maps and keep us compliant with all of the laws and legal regulations that we have. So we need those people, but they don't necessarily understand case management. They don't necessarily understand the day-to-day pressures of one of my favorite people on my caseload is falling off and I can't stop him. They don't understand the pressures of I had to go to the funeral home for one of my people today. And that's a disconnect. So instead of appreciating our staff, which is great, let's support them. And we support them by cleaning up the environments in which they live. And this is what I have focused my life on, my professional life, on figuring out ways to structure the organization so that it opens capacity for these people so that they can sit there and they can think and they can come up with new ideas and they can participate in the innovations and can collect more data, as well as sustainability of the things that we do, because sustainability is a real problem and a real challenge for us. How do we continue when the grant money runs out? How do we continue when the person who is overlooking us walks away and the project is complete? How do we embed the sustainability into the organizational structure of our agencies?
You said something earlier which reminded me something I reflect on as far as nobody's reinventing the R&R mousetrap. We've got that down. We've got that all figured out. As we're all discovering, and as you've alluded to, the devil's in the details when it comes to implementation science, which we're seeing changes in the field now that we're finally starting to give due diligence to implementation science and getting away from that sort of train and pray attitude that we had for so long. What strategies have you found that are the most effective for examining, improving, and really enhancing that organizational culture? You know how culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but changing that organizational culture within that correctional administration.
So I've looked at the landmark studies of organizational culture, and Edgar Schein says that there are 3 levels. And he presents this as kind of an iceberg. So at the top are what he calls artifacts and behaviors. These are things that we can see about the program. And for us, it would translate into strategic plans, policies and procedures, evaluations, quality assurance measures, reports that we provide to each other, any words or numbers that make up, describe, or predict the success of a specific program, unit, jurisdiction, courthouse, state, initiative, whatever it may be. And when we pull all of these things together and they are aligned, so what we say in our policy and procedure manual is exactly what our participants see when we give them paperwork. When we say that these are our values, our staff see it in our presentation of our website. If we're going to talk about our staff being important, let's put them on display. Absolutely. These are the way that we can, these people, not just our staff, but also the participants in which they are pretty much solely responsible for working with. This is our community, our internal and external community. And when you think about the services that we offer our participants through our officers, they really become the distributors of our goodwill. All of them. And when our officers are clear on what we expect from them, when they are clear on what the standards are, when they are clear and on each piece, part, setup, all of the things, it makes their lives a lot easier. I think we put a lot of unnecessary stress on our staff, and I'll give you an example. Say, for example, we have admission criteria for a specialized docket. I mean problem-solving court. I work in Ohio, so there's specialized dockets to us. But I'm working in a domestic violence specialized docket. And we have admission criteria that we have to follow. But the administrators or the judges decide that, well, you know what? Maybe you can take this person that doesn't fit your admission criteria. We can only take intimate partners, people who are in a romantic relationship, but now we're getting grandmas and grandsons. Now we're getting brothers and sisters. What do I do with that? I can't necessarily, I'm not set up to deal with this kind of case. I'm not set up to deal with this kind of person. But from the judge's perspective, it looks like a domestic violence case, so of course I'm going to send it your way. And we really need, and these are nitty-gritty details, but we need to understand these nitty-gritty details about each other's positions. When I was younger, we didn't have cell phones. Here I go dating myself again, but we didn't have cell phones. And my mother had a strict rule that there was no noise at the table. So if there was food on the table, there was no TV, no radio. So my brother and I had to get really creative about what to do in the morning because it could get really boring over cereal. So we decided that we would help each other figure out how to describe things. We would put the cereal box in between us. He would describe his side, and I would describe my side. And then we would compare. And he would say, well, this is what I said. And I would suggest, well, did you see this? Did you see this bold print? Did you see this blue hat? And then I turned the box around. He said, why didn't you tell me the hat was green? I didn't see the hat. And it was a kid's exercise, but it really is a good illustration of how we need each other to see all parts of the box. And we're going to see things that other people don't see. And if we don't listen to each other, if the administration is not listening to the experts who are doing the work, if the experts are not listening to the administrators about how things have changed and how compliance has changed, and if everyone is not working on the same page, then we're creating a lot of unnecessary stress, a lot of obstacles that shouldn't be there.
I love the story of your brother and you with the cereal boxes, by the way. I grew up back in the day, too, with no devices, where you literally would memorize the nutritional information on the side of a box of Captain Crunch or Quisp or whatever sugary cereal we were eating back then. But I digress. I love the point you're making, though, about looking at a problem or an issue or anything from a different perspective. There's so much value, I think, Dena, in perspective taking. I've had the good fortune of doing some training over in Europe. And one thing I've noticed, I always tell people it's sort of the, if you've seen Pulp Fiction, where they talk about the difference with Burger Kings in France, like, yeah, they're the same, but they're a little different. You know, they put mayonnaise on their fries and you can buy beer in a Burger King kind of thing. Yeah, they've got our core correctional practices in Europe, but they're just a little bit different. One thing, they really lean into perspective taking, which I know we try to capture that through motivation or interviewing, those types of, again, quote unquote, core correctional practices. But it reminded me with your brother, just getting that other point of view. There's so much value. And now what you're doing is applying it at the organizational level versus the client probation officer level. But yeah, that's a great illustration. Could you cite, I'm a big case study guy, could you cite an example of a project that you saw where you use those approaches and it really sort of increased the effectiveness of whatever the service that you were trying to improve was?
Absolutely. I like to work I like to get my hands dirty, so to speak. So most of my work has been close to programs, program directors, and more at the jurisdictional level. I'd love to go broader and see how far we can scale this, because it absolutely has scalability potential that is, there's so many opportunities here. But staying at the program level, one of the programs that I worked with did not have any what we call supervision model. There was, while we know that they need substance abuse treatment, we know that we have criminogenic, we know these things, there was no real way to assign or refer people to the specific types of treatment. We had clinical assessments, we had risk assessments, but what does that mean? And it sounds really remedial, but it was huge. It was a huge process to say, okay, this is from the supervision side, these are the requirements, and these are the requirements for each phase. They have to come to court every week during phase 1. It goes down to every other week, phase 2, and align those requirements up with their risk level. So making the supervision, not just the supervision level, but also the requirements risk-based. And then doing the same thing on the programming or the treatment side. And setting up domains or targets of specific areas that we needed to work on. And that aligned all of the assessments. It aligned all of the resources. It aligned all of the referrals. And it enabled us to put together a treatment matrix where even the treatment referrals are risk-based. Because the risk principle isn't just about getting a risk score for supervision level. It's about considering that risk level in all of the decisions throughout the supervision period. So this way, the risk level could be considered at each referral decision and would be considered over throughout the term of the supervision. And that's what I mean by embedding the actual application of the evidence-based practice into the day-to-day practice for the officers. And it helped the officers because they had some structure at which they could kind of follow. And while their discretion was absolutely valued, and of course their discretion and their judgments and their interpretations were going to be our first concern, there were some kind of evidence that they could cite and say, hey, it's not just my thought, it's also this evidence that we could take into courts that would look at the different behaviors.
Are there other challenges out there that you could think of if you put yourself in the role of a correctional administrator and they're looking at all the cool stuff out there we're doing with ethics, sticks, the practice models, all sorts of great things? What are some of the top challenges that those individuals are going to face when they decide to roll up their sleeves and implement these effective supervision practices? And how would you recommend addressing some of those big challenges?
I think the first challenge is going to be that the staff is going to be very suspicious. Why are you doing this? Well, after all this time and all these years, now and we have to, we're a socially constructed field. We don't necessarily have rules and definitive things that happen like biology or chemistry, we call the hard sciences. So we are socially constructed, and we are dependent upon the community giving us the power to do the jobs that we need to do. So I say that because we have to start to acknowledge that little p politics is having its effect. And not all jurisdictions and not all courthouses, not all probation departments are in the same boat here. But it's very difficult to work in an environment where little p politics is the dominating decision factor. But it's worth it. We need to get away from that. And we can do that by giving structure to our agencies and our program. And that means this alignment throughout all of our written documents and all of our measures, and making sure that we see. Because through this lining everything up, I call it cleaning the house, but through the cleaning of the house, we can start to have people over and get more transparent, if you know what I mean. They can start to see what we do. And more importantly, our staff can see what they do. And that, to me, I think we need to look at, I would like administrators to start considering this a responsibility. We need to start making our staff feel better, because it's hard to deal with these 150 caseloads and all of the pieces and parts, and then to be required by policy and procedure to do one thing, but my supervisor is telling me to do another, and I don't know what to do. Clean it up. Make it easier.
Let me ask you a question. You mentioned, and I jotted down, communication, which, as we all know, the number one reason projects fail is lack of communication. And you suggested that when you're saying be transparent with the staff. They're going to ask, why are you doing this? I think one of the big conundrums in corrections, and you talked about this as well, is that we're sort of playing blind man's bluff as far as I'm doing these core correctional practices, but unlike my doppelganger in the private sector, I'm not seeing my sales go up, or I'm not seeing X occur. That's sort of I kind of refer to it as the dirty little secret. I had this conversation with my younger brother, who's a retired police captain. So it's not just a public sector versus private sector thing. But when I explained to him that, this is how it works. You're hired as an officer, and you'll get a caseload, and then unless that case totally goes off the rails and you end up on the front page of the newspaper, you're going to retire in X amount of years and get your gold watch. But you're not going to know, Joe, if you were the most effective probation officer in that office, or if Dena was the most effective. It's just sort of like freelance, supervise as you see fit. The point I'm trying to make is that we don't leverage data for the benefit of what you're saying, to share this with staff members as far as, see, these things are moving the needle. It's just whoever the strongest voice in the room is, or the most, popular kid in class. Yeah, Bobby supervises this way. He's charming there, whatever. Yeah, that's how I'm going to supervise. We can't come back at them and say, no, you're moving the needle. You're not moving the needle. Have you seen anywhere where folks are at least trying to, even on a macro level, use data more locally, though, beyond just, well, trust us because the Canadians say so, or UCCI says so?
Well, like I said, I think we've done a pretty good job with the evidence-based kind of process. We know what evidence-based looks like, and I think that we trust the people who tell us that they're evidence-based. For example, the Office of Justice Programs, they have wonderful tools in juvenile justice prevention, as well as victims, as well as all kinds of places in the system. So using those tools and trusting them that they know what they're looking for. We've done a good job with that. We've also done a fairly good job of taking that information and making it practical or scalable. So, for example, different think tanks, I like to think of them, but the National Center for State Courts, the National Institute of Corrections, different places that kind of say, okay, this is the research, but this is the step-by-step process or the things that we're looking for to make it work in the day-to-day. The problem is that guidance, while it kind of simplifies the research aspect of it, it doesn't necessarily go far enough into the programs. The Supreme Court of Ohio has a certification process for all specialized dockets, and it's intense. It's intense. And going through that process, we have to apply and make linkages and document where all of the evidence-based practice and compliance is in our documentation of the program, in the program description, in our documents to the participants. So it's beautiful and it lines everything really nicely. The problem is I have a PhD and 30 years of experience doing this, and I had a hard time trying to make it work for the day-to-day. So there's a big gap here. And I think that we can fill it, but we need to go to the experts again, the people who are doing the work, and say, okay, what does this look like to you? Can we make your phase applications, for example, the way we phase people up between phases, can we base that on needs? Can we include needs? Can we include these behavioral measures to say they are making progress? And the beautiful part about that is that once we are able to collect data and we're able to track these things, we're going to be less dependent upon recidivism as our end-all be-all.
Yeah.
And getting these intermediate measures and having them on a consistent basis, and then being able to give them back to the program coordinators and the judges and the chief of POs and say, hey, this is how well you're doing. And that's where quality assurance then becomes continuous. We have now embedded quality assurance based on evidence-based practice and the compliance regulations into the day-to-day, and we are measuring the things that we are actually doing because we are actually doing evidence-based practice.
Right, and we're moving it from QA to CQI. Maybe you just partially answered my next question or laid the foundation, but how do you believe education for both the staff members and the clients we serve plays a role in the restructuring of correctional services that we're contemplating here?
I love where we are in education. One of the reasons I wanted to teach for a while, and I did spend some time teaching, was because I realized that the people who were coming into the field were not ready. Oh my gosh, they had no idea what these jobs entailed, and I said, I've got to fix this. At least got to figure out what's going on. And so I spent a lot of time working with these students and then realized that the students weren't ready for college and then spent time there. But really, we've done a really good job of taking what I call the contextual knowledge, the definitions, terms, acronyms of the field that you need to know in order to be successful in corrections. We've got that. When I talk about R&R to students, seniors, they understand that. So we're not dealing with, we don't want to know that. We don't, because it's become second nature to them. Because they're getting it in their foundational degrees, it's innate in them that of course we're going to do an R&R. Of course we're looking at dosage as an outcome measure. Of course we're doing these evidence-based practices. We've done a great job of. What we have not done a great job of, I think, is informing the offenders, the participants, of why we're asking them to do the things that we're asking them to do. When we give them information, when we give them the requirements that they need to complete to succeed, as well as outline the resources they have to complete those requirements, and focus them on the opportunities that will come available because they're doing their requirements and using those resources, we can invest them into their own supervision. And that's the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to invest them in their own supervision. But we kind of have to give our officers a break first and allow them to invest in their programs, allow them to invest in their jobs. And then they can begin to express that and build the environment on their caseloads that is about investment. And I really think that that's where the field is heading, is this mutual agreement, this working alliance on the investment into the pro-social lifestyle. On the administrative side, we have to build the environment. On the officer side, they have to deliver the services and be engaging and motivational interviewing and all of the exciting and kind of encouraging rah stuff. And then on the offender side, they have an environment in which they can now make an informed choice, not just being dictated, this is the way it is.
Yeah, exactly. Reminds me a lot of the great work that Brian Lovins has done, which I'm sure you're familiar with, talking about, switching the PO's role from that of referee to that of coach. And how can I help you win? How can I help you succeed versus I'm just here to tell on you when you don't walk the straight and narrow and fill those penalty flags. Yeah. You talked about your work with specialty courts. So let's go there a little bit. Talk about your work when you were program director for the Summit County Domestic Violence Intervention Court. DV clients always present unique challenges, I feel. Can you maybe share some of those experiences working with that specialized court and with that population?
Absolutely. DV was new to me. I'm more reentry, and my background is a little bit more general than domestic violence. But Judge Michael offered me a position, and I kind of jumped at it. Of course, she has an amazing team and an amazing program, and we did so much good work. But it was still a challenge because from a case standpoint, you have a 100% violent caseload. Other than sex offenders, odds are you're not going to really have this anywhere else. And the difference, I think, between sex offenders and domestic violence is that domestic violence offenders are typically more kind of pop off, jump. They're more unpredictable. You don't know exactly what you're going to get. And where we can talk about that later. That's a whole podcast in and of itself. But domestic violence offenders, they're unpredictable. But you're also dealing with the victim. And this is the only place in corrections I've ever worked where the victim has to take first priority. The victim's safety comes first. So if a victim makes an allegation, the program has to act. It does not have a choice not to act. We can't wait for a couple of days or wait for a couple of weeks to get a capias or a warrant signed. So we had to adjust a lot of the policies and procedures to be able to move very quickly when these things happened. So that was a challenge from an administrative standpoint. It was also a challenge from a case management standpoint because you're trying to advocate for your caseload, but yet you have to hold them accountable. And maybe it's not true, but you don't have the evidence yet. It doesn't matter. You got to move. So that 100% violent was a little bit difficult or different, not difficult, just different. And it really changed the perspective, the side of the box that we were looking at. The second thing is funding. Most of the federal grants exclude violent offenders, so there's no way to get grant funding there. And most of the domestic violence funding goes for victims, and well, it should. But where some of the jurisdictions, for example, may have a certain number of staff that they want grant funded or something like that for specialized dockets or specialized programs, domestic violence can't get that. So those courts and those specialized probation units are they're at a disadvantage when it comes to being able to try new things, do new things, and just kind of shore up some of their issues. So those two things specifically from an administrative standpoint. And then the secondary trauma. That I'm getting stuck because it's when you think back at the calls, the 911 calls, you've got a 6-year-old calling the police screaming that my daddy's killing my mommy, and you're hearing it. And that's Tuesday. And that's every case. And so I think that takes a toll on the mental health and something that I think we need to be really concerned with. So DV it's a wonderful job, but I think it's a specialized person that can go into it.
It really is. Yes, I can relate. You're right with the victim variable there, that you don't have a lot of other offenses, or at least it's not as overt, if you will. It can be a very grounding, I guess, experience. I know sometimes I'm guilty as charged. I get in my evidence-based practice ivory tower, but I forget about those phone calls from the 6-year-old calling in because the no contact order was just violated, or et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it's like I said, it's a good reminder, a good grounder of the difficult terrain that correctional officers, probation officers work in. Dena, look into your crystal ball, if you will. If I have you back on the show, or when I have you back on the show in a year, 3 years, or 5 years, what future developments, or I love talking about innovations, what innovations do you anticipate in the field of correctional practice and client supervision?
Like I said, I think at the beginning, we're going into a new generation of correctional supervision, and we are moving at the speed of light. If you think about it, this is the 50th year of Martinson's publication of Nothing Works. Yep. And we not only are we not there anymore, we know that some things work with some people. We've got virtual lists of things that work with most people. And we're learning what works with some and others, and all of it. It's wonderful. And I think that we're moving into a more unified, if I can, where we're crossing, it's not just academics and researchers anymore. It's not just the field anymore. We're coming together. And that's the way I was kind of quote unquote professionally raised. At the University of Cincinnati, there was no differentiation between the classroom and that project. There was no differentiation between applied research and for the class and for the work. So that really helped us, I think all of us, and it's evidenced by my fellow alumni around, and not just in corrections, but everywhere, that we were able to start building that bridge. And that's a powerful legacy that we were not only given, but we were also able to give. I will tell you a little story. It's one of those things of, in the room when it happened, it was really early in my career, and I was sitting at a table at some conference. I wish I could remember which one, but some conference with Ed Latessa on my right and Dave Dillingham on my left. And they were having a conversation about all of this wonderful stuff in Canada and how were we going to do it and all of that. And Dave Dillingham says to Ed, he says jokingly, "It's going to take an army." And Ed says, "Okay." And, but he gave us the skills, he gave us the opportunities to build and change things according to the way that we saw it too. We left our legacies in his work, and we are now building the environments in which our students and the people that we work with can build their legacies in this work. And I would like to see that the next generation of corrections be about investment of our individual selves into the structure of our organizations. And I think that's when we will become truly humanistic, when we have included the human side of ourselves into the entire organizational structure. And that's a little bit touchy-feely. I know that's way out there, but you asked me for a crystal ball.
And it's a great response. I love it. And that Army, I would contend, has, it has been built. And the University of Cincinnati and UCCI, that is a great legacy. I know you and I spoke a couple of times prior to this interview, but at one point, I think I relayed to you that when I was reviewing your resume, if you will, on LinkedIn, I said, well, you had me at UCCI. It's just sort of out there in the field, at least in evidence-based practice circles, that if you've got that affiliation and or that credential, it's like, yeah, you get it. It's, yeah, you're one of us kind of thing, if not leading that charge. So yeah, it's a great community to be a part of. Imagine a young professional with just hired their first probation or parole job and do a little bit of the, if I only knew now, or if I only knew then what I knew now, what would you tell those folks just starting out in the field of community corrections, probation, and parole, or just anyone really interested in that reform effort? What's a piece of advice you would give to that young practitioner?
Build a personal support network. Make sure you've got some support at home. This is a hard job. It's corrections itself is a hard job, but trying to change corrections the way it's been for so many years, and trying to deal with all of the political considerations and the long-term heels that are dug into concrete that they don't want to change. That's hard. That's a hard day when you have spent 4 years working on something and have to come home and say, it's not going to fly. It's just not going to fly. And that's the administrative day. That's our reality. And get up the next day and try again, just like our officers do. But it is so rewarding. It is, when I was teaching, one of the greatest days to be a teacher is the day that your student, the light goes on and they realize this is what they want to do for the rest of their lives. That's one of the greatest days ever. And when they get into the field and they've been in the field for a year or two, that light starts to dim and it starts to go out. And we can get it back. We can absolutely get that light back if we just clean up the house and talk to each other and come in with an open mind and try to keep that open mind and keep that enthusiasm that you come in with. I used to tell my students, remember why you started. Mm-hmm. That'll keep you going when you don't think you can anymore.
Yeah, that's another piece of advice I'll tell folks in training all the time too, is remember your why. In fact, a colleague and I, you can likely relate, we're always trying to come up with clever icebreakers to start a training or a facilitation. And one we've gone to the well on quite a bit is, remind us why you get into this field. Whether it was working in a juvenile detention facility or at a residential treatment facility or something. But, back, like you said, when you were all piss and vinegar, full of enthusiasm, like, what was your why? Like, why did you get into this field? And when you pose that, folks who've been, as you've just noted, exposed to a lot of the toxicity that comes with this field, and they're challenging their resiliency. Yeah, sometimes just remind folks, hey, remember why you get into this field, where that spark came from, and that sometimes this is all it needs to, again, give yourself a shot of resiliency there. Because in the end, it's always so much more rewarding when you're doing those early discharge reports versus coming back from court because you had someone's supervision revoked and they're off to the penitentiary. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it would be really nice to get a head nod for all of those early termination reports. Yeah. And the extensiveness of those early termination reports.
Well, Dena, it's what you said earlier about we're sort of exposed to like only celebrating the failures. That's what we remember. I mean, we remember the contested probation violation hearings, or there were any kind of a violation hearing or somebody reoffending, but it's hard pressed to remember all the early discharges or just the regular, you rolled out supervision and now you're done. We don't remember that. It's just the failures. failures.
Exactly. And if it would be great if we could log on to the system and get a report since the beginning we were hired to say, how many early terminations have I had?
Or even if there was a way, again, I'm in my utopian world again here, but again, colleagues and I talked about those of us who've left supervising caseloads and getting into training world, but say we're walking through downtown or at a food court somewhere and you bump into an old client who gets you up to date on, oh, my kids are playing baseball now and I'm working at X, Y, or Z. I mean, even that anecdotal, I bumped into an old client and they're doing great, is just such an amazing shot in the arm. Yeah, like, oh, crap, this stuff does work. Yeah, but we never see that. We never see that. You might read about an ex-client who, oh, there was a police shooting. Yeah, I supervised that guy 10 years ago. But we're not reminded of those successes.
And we need to be. We really need to be. And because we don't get them naturally, we need to create them.
Dr. Dena Hanley, thank you so much for being a guest on the Criminologists Podcast. I'm looking forward to your next interview and or our next adventure together. Take care, Dena, and we'll talk to you very soon, I hope.
Thank you so much, Joe. And if I could just shout out to everybody who's listening, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for those days that you don't want to do this anymore. None of us are alone. We're all here together fighting the good fight. It just sometimes feels like we are. So I just want to say, if nobody said thank you today, thank you. And thank you, Joe.
Take care, Dena. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
As we draw to a close on this milestone 200th episode of the Criminologists Podcast, I'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you to Dr. Dena Hanley for her invaluable insights and inspiring discussion today. Her dedication and expertise in the field of criminal justice have truly illuminated the path for effective correctional practices and supervision. Before we sign off, I'd like to briefly revisit the exciting changes coming to our program. As mentioned earlier, we are evolving our format to include debate-style discussions with multiple subject matter experts and potentially reintroducing the mock caseloads featuring fictitious clients to model the core correctional skills we love talking about on this program. These changes are aimed at enriching our content and providing you, our listeners, with diverse perspectives and deeper insights into the world of criminal justice. Another significant aspect of our journey is the Trauma-Informed Desistance Program, also known as TIDES. My colleague, Nicole Kimberly Staley, and I are thrilled to be training our TIDES model next month, and we're looking forward to sharing updates and insights in our upcoming episodes. For those intrigued by TIDES and eager to learn more, please feel free to reach out to us at thetidesllc@gmail.com. That's thetidesllc@gmail.com. Your interest and engagement in this innovative approach to correctional practices are greatly appreciated. Moreover, we are excited to announce that we will be presenting on the TIDES model at the World Congress on Probation and Parole in The Hague next April. This is a remarkable opportunity for us to showcase the TIDES model on a global stage, and we cannot wait to share the experience with you all. And as we continue on this journey together, remember that each episode is a step towards understanding and improving the justice system. Your support and feedback have been instrumental in shaping the Criminologist, and we are grateful for your continued listenership. So until our next episode, keep questioning, keep learning, and stay engaged in the vital conversation surrounding criminal justice. Thank you for being with us on this incredible journey to 200 episodes, and here's to many more. We will be back soon with a fresh episode. In the meantime, you may contact the show or reach out to us through our website, the Paragon Group criminologistsllc.com for training or presentations as to core correctional skills, the topic of desistance from crime, or, of course, our innovative TIDES model. If you have questions or comments as to this podcast, feel free to contact the show via our email at thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. That's thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. Remember to follow us through our Facebook and Instagram pages at The Criminologist Podcast. New fun images are being added all the time to those feeds. You don't want to miss out. The Criminologist Media Group is also on X. Give us a follow at Crim Media Group. That's CRIM Media Group. You may also connect with me, Joseph Arvidsson, or Dena Hanley on LinkedIn, and follow both the Criminologist Podcast and the Paragon Group on our LinkedIn pages. Hey, lastly, if you've not already done so, check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Criminologist, for additional content as to the themes of this podcast. And if you believe in what we're doing on the show, if you're part of the movement, please spread the word, tell a friend or a coworker or a colleague about us, ask them to subscribe to the podcast, and do so yourself if you've not already done so. And always remember, folks, there's no them, there's only us. We are celebrating a significant milestone, our 200th episode of the Criminologist Podcast.
You are the one of my dreams.
The Criminologist Podcast is a production of the Paragon Group, LLC. For speaking engagements, interviews, program design, or training opportunities, please visit us at theparagongroup.llc.com. If you enjoyed the show, you can find more content and videos on our YouTube channel, The Criminologist. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Both the Criminologist Podcast and the Criminologist channel are brought to you by the Criminologist Media Group. Be sure to give us a 5-star review, and thanks for listening.